come to order. Welcome to our first subcommittee hearing of the fiscal year 25 appropriation season, and my first hearing as chairman of this subcommittee. Thank you. Right on cue, Mike. I'm deeply honored to lead this piece of the Appropriations Committee with potentially the most direct impact on each congressional district across the United States, including my own. Today, we welcome the testimony from the Honorable Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of the Department of Transportation, on the fiscal year 2025 budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for appearing before us today and for your service to this country. I know I've said it to you before, but as a former mayor myself, I appreciate that we have such a successful mayor at the helm of the DOT, and I mean that. The Department of Transportation is requesting $25.5 billion in discretionary budget authority for fiscal year 25, coupled with the $36.8 billion in advanced appropriations provided by the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, the IIJA, and the nearly $81 billion from the Highway Trust Fund. DOT is seeking $143 billion in total resources. In total, the IIJA provides $184 billion in advance appropriations from 22 to 26. Let me remind you, these appropriations are under the jurisdiction of this subcommittee. As such, we will continue to subject the IIJA appropriations to strong oversight as we develop the fiscal 25 bill. Mr. Secretary, I look forward to working with you to prioritize our nation's vital infrastructure and transportation needs in Arkansas's 3rd District and across the country, while safeguarding the hard-earned taxpayer dollars of our citizens. I know our work on this subcommittee impacts the safety, economic opportunity, and the quality of life of every American, a duty I take seriously. Even as we work to rein in excessive spending, let me assure you that safety will remain our top priority for the subcommittee as we prepare the 25 bill. From the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse to the East Palestine Trail derailment to the close calls happening far too often at our airports, you can see the importance of safe transportation systems. We will continue to provide appropriate levels of support to DOT programs that ensure the safety of our skies, our roads, and our railroads. I want to work with you, Mr. Secretary, to ensure that our states and localities are getting the most bang for their buck out of this infusion of federal support for infrastructure. We cannot expect these unprecedented levels of funding to continue in perpetuity, which means the grants being delivered now need to be an effective use of taxpayer dollars. Burdensome 100-page applications and an immense web of new regulatory requirements is not helpful to grantees trying to get shovels in the ground. I also want to ensure that the impacts of these unprecedented levels of investment continue to be felt by all districts around the country, not just the large urban areas. I recognize the mega projects that have been needed for a long time in our big cities, but Arkansas's 3rd District and rural areas around the nation need a level playing field. I look forward to your testimony today and working with you to ensure that the department can continue to deliver on its mission to ensure a safe and modern transportation system. The jurisdiction of this subcommittee is one of the most unique of the Appropriations Committee, as its impacts are seen in every single congressional district. As such, we have a history of bipartisanship that I look forward to continuing as we begin the fiscal 25 appropriations process. I'd now like to recognize my good friend and the ranking member from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for his opening statement. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those who didn't know, we had a very strong bipartisan partnership during a time where we flipped and did both chair and ranking members of the FSGG subcommittee. I look forward to carrying on that tradition. on the THUD subcommittee, and I must recognize from Rogers, Arkansas to South Bend, Indiana, America's mayors are the cradle of leadership. So, Ms. Secretary, welcome back. You've been a great partner over the years, and I appreciate your continued commitment to work with this committee to strengthen our transportation networks. Overall, the budget request dedicates nearly $109 billion to sustain our transportation networks and protect the safety of our transportation workers. This investment includes hiring 2,000 additional air traffic controllers to keep our skies and runways safe and efficient. $2.4 billion to expand bus and rapid transit to help everyday Americans travel to work, school, and health appointments. And more than $3 billion to prevent collisions, improve worker safety, and perform signal and track upgrades on our rail systems. These investments, combined with those made during the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, will ensure that whether it flies, floats, or rolls, advancements in safety and modernization of our transportation can be made in this decade. These targeted investments will help accelerate transportation safety, resiliency, and mobility improvements, while prioritizing lengthy and costly capital backlogs that propel the sophistication of America's transportation networks. Yet and still, emergencies and unforeseen circumstances happen, and this subcommittee should be prepared to help our federal partners respond. Ensuring agencies such as DOT have the resources and flexibility necessary to deploy and rapidly respond to accidents, near incursions, or major catastrophe in real time is vital. We must continue to invest in solutions to create more resilient supply chain networks, workforce pipelines, and multimodal reliability. Revisiting the emergence of these needs each year through the annual appropriation process is critical. I look forward to working with the chairman and you, Mr. Secretary, in getting to fiscal year 2025 agreement that adheres to the Fiscal Responsibility Act requirements without compromising the future of America's transportation system. We look forward to your testimony today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I think the gentleman from Illinois, and he is correct. We had a terrific working relationship over at Financial Services and General Government. Look forward to continuing that relationship here today. The overall chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Cole, had intended to be here today, but I think everybody knows he's facing a disaster in his own district with tornadoes a couple of days ago, and he is there attending to matters in his district in Oklahoma. Without objection, his prepared remarks will be included in the record. And now I'd like to recognize my good friend from the great state of Connecticut and the ranking member on appropriations, Ms. DeLauro.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Womack, Ranking Member Quigley. Thank you both for holding this hearing. Congratulations to you, Chairman Womack, on your first hearing as chair of the subcommittee, and you are indeed a great friend. I want to say a thank you to you, Secretary Buttigieg, for being here today, for all that you have done to streamline and improve the travel experience throughout our airports, rail systems, and other transportation modes, and for your role in overseeing all the work underway across this country, rebuilding American infrastructure, and that is thanks to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I know we all wish we were joined in this hearing by the new chair of the full committee and the previous chair of this subcommittee, Chairman Cole, but as the chair remarked, he's unable to be here, but we pray for a swift recovery for the communities across Oklahoma that are impacted by the recent tornadoes. For hardworking Americans, business travel, daily commutes, hard-earned leisure travel, everything in between, life in America requires safe and efficient ways of connecting. Americans deserve the safest, most advanced systems in the world across all forms of transportation. Our transportation infrastructure is central to the health and to the well-being of all of our communities. It connects everyone, urban, suburban, rural areas, to their jobs, schools, grocery stores, and the care that they depend on. And the work of your department, together with this subcommittee, ensures every American has access to reliable, safe, and efficient transportation. As Americans travel in greater numbers than ever before, we have seen our transportation infrastructure really put to the test. massive air travel disruptions, catastrophic train derailments, elevated pedestrian fatality rates emphasize the work to improve our transportation systems is never ending. And together, over the past 3 years, through this committee's annual investments and in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have done so much to repair our transportation infrastructure. But the progress must continue. In the 2024 government funding package, this committee made robust investments in the safety and durability of our transportation infrastructure. We created and sustained tens of thousands of good-paying American jobs with investments in airports, highways, transit systems, passenger rail, and in our ports. We made targeted investments to improve our transportation system safety, cut emissions, increase resiliency, address inequities, and fight the climate crisis while generating economic opportunities for working and middle-class families. And we protected the bipartisan infrastructure law, ensuring that the legislation's generational investments continue to complement the work that your department does on an annual basis. To build on this success, the President's request for DOT includes $25.7 billion in discretionary funding to create safer, more equitable, and more modern transportation systems. Critically, the budget calls for an additional $1.7 billion in funding for the Federal Aviation Administration, which desperately needs to bolster staffing, modernize its systems to keep up with the historic rates at which Americans are traveling through the skies. The budget also invests in the Federal Railroad Administration for infrastructure and safety enhancements, and to ensure that Amtrak is able to meet the needs and demands of the public, which is increasingly looking for rail options to meet their travel needs. And just as an aside, Mr. Secretary, I ride Amtrak twice a week, and it's always crowded. It really is full, and it is a great and wonderful, safe way to travel, and we thank you for that. I know you believe, like I do, that investing in our transportation infrastructure is one of the best ways to supercharge the American economy. We get an extraordinary return on our investment dollar when we connect communities, facilitate commerce, and draw Americans closer together by building modern, fast, and safe transportation systems. So it's wonderful to have you here with us this morning. We thank you for all of your work. Look forward to your testimony. And with that, I want to say a thank you to Chairman Womack and Ranking Member Quigley, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Secretary, this is the first hearing of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee in this cycle of appropriations, and I can't think of a more appropriate first witness than the Secretary of Transportation. And with that, sir, the floor is yours, and we'll accept your opening statement.
Well, thanks very much, Chairman, and let me add to the congratulations for your taking on this leadership role. We're looking forward to working with you, and our whole department feels the same way. Likewise, I want to acknowledge and congratulate Chairman Cole, and our thoughts are certainly with the communities impacted that he's with right now. So with that, Chair, Ranking Member Quigley, Ranking Member DeLauro, and all of the members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss President Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget request for our Department of Transportation. And thank you for your partnership as we have delivered safer, stronger transportation across every mode and across the United States. Roadway fatalities are at last trending downward. Shipping costs are down as supply chains run more smoothly. And airline cancellations last year were the lowest in a decade. As you all know, we also have much more to do. We are rebuilding, not just from the pandemic, but from decades of disinvestment and an enforcement environment that, in our view, for too long privileged corporations instead of protecting people. The President's budget request, totaling $146.2 billion, builds on the progress that we've made and enables us to deliver on the important challenges and opportunities that remain. I'll start with our primary mission across every mode, which is safety. On our roads, we have funded projects in every state to improve safety for all travelers. After years of heading in the wrong direction, we've now had 7 consecutive quarters of declining deaths on America's roadways. But this remains a national crisis, taking over 40,000 lives a year, and we're requesting $72 billion to improve America's roads and bridges with an emphasis on safety and efficiency. We are constantly reminded of the importance of transportation safety. The country watched in shock as a cargo ship struck and destroyed the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, taking 6 lives and closing a vital port. We're working across the Biden-Harris administration and with state, local, and private sector partners to help reopen that port as quickly as possible. We also immediately got to work with the state on the first steps toward rebuilding the bridge. With regard to aviation, America was rightly alarmed when a door blew out of an Alaska Airlines flight in January. The FAA acted swiftly to ground 737 MAX 9 aircraft until each plane was safe to return to the air. And the FAA is significantly increasing oversight of Boeing. The agency is also investing in the physical infrastructure, staffing, and technology of our national airspace and airports, and requesting $26.8 billion for the FAA, which will support oversight of aircraft production, accelerate the modernization of the national airspace system, increase the target to hire 2,000 air traffic controllers, and continue improving airports. On our rails, we're modernizing infrastructure, fixing road-rail crossings, and improving service in places like Chicago, Moore, Oklahoma, and between New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, just to name a few. We are requesting $16.4 billion, which, in addition to expanding and improving rail service, will allow us to increase the number of safety inspectors to 400 and add new staff to complete safety audits. We recently finalized the rule for safe train crew sizes, establishing what most Americans assumed was already the case, which is a minimum of 2 crew members, generally applying to large freight trains. Indeed, we're taking every step that does not require an act of Congress, but we are also continuing to call on Congress to pass the Bipartisan Railway Safety Act that would provide much-needed authorities to keep passengers, workers, and communities safe. Across the country, we are repairing and replacing what existed and building and modernizing for the future. Last week, I was in Las Vegas for the groundbreaking of the new rail line from Southern California to Las Vegas, which will, we expect, be the first true high-speed rail line in service in the United States. It was a very good day for the millions of Americans who will ride that train every year, for our truck drivers and supply chains that will benefit from less congested highways, for everyone across the country who will live in a climate with 800 million fewer pounds of carbon pollution annually. But it is more than each of those separate benefits. It's a celebration of the idea that America can still build massive, forward-looking engineering marvels that make people's lives better, with the potential of many more to come. That one project is creating good union jobs for 1,000 men and women who will maintain and operate the train line, plus another 10,000 good union construction jobs to build it. And everywhere I go, I meet workers already benefiting from these jobs. I think of workers like a young veteran I met in Washington State who reminded me of so many people that I got to know in uniform, now facing the challenges of building a civilian life. He talked about what it was like coming off active duty as a Marine, how hard it was to get on his feet as a civilian. And then he said, quote, "I came across this union, the amount of training I got, the amount of work stability, the level I have to conduct myself at, the purpose I have, prevented me from becoming a statistic," end quote. And now he is the first person in his family to own a house. Everywhere we're meeting people who remind us what it means to have these kinds of jobs. These benefits are being multiplied across tens of thousands of projects, including construction workers building livelihoods as they modernize America's infrastructure, helping us build stronger supply chains, cleaner air, and safer, more affordable ways for every American to get where they need to go. We're making good progress, but there's more to do, and we look forward to working with this committee to continue delivering for every community in the country. Thanks very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, sir. We'll now begin the Q&A portion of this hearing. Let me remind everybody, strict adherence to the 5-minute rule. Should be noted that sometime in the next hour and 10 or 15 minutes, we'll have votes called. We will make a game time decision at that time about whether we break for votes and come back. The Secretary has been very generous with his time, and we'll have to kind of sort out where we are in the rounds before we determine that, and some of that will be influenced by how many members are expecting to return for potentially a second round of questions. So I'll recognize myself first, and not surprisingly, we're going to talk a little bit about the Baltimore Bridge. Mr. Secretary, a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to sit down with my friend Governor Wes Moore of Maryland to express my support to Maryland in its recovery efforts after the Baltimore Bridge collapse. Chairman Cole and I and other members of this subcommittee and others will get to see those efforts firsthand this coming Thursday when we take a trip there. I want to take this opportunity to send my condolences, and I speak on behalf of this entire subcommittee in expressing our condolences to the families of the workers who perished in the line of duty, and convey my sincere appreciation to the first responders who kept this event from being a bigger tragedy, and to the men and women who are working night and day to clear the wreckage and reopen the Port of Baltimore. I understand the goal is to restore full service to the port by the end of May. I was pleased to see that more temporary channels have opened recently and ahead of schedule to allow bigger ships to leave and enter the port. Along those lines, Mr. Secretary, give us an update on the status of the full reopening of the port, what the impact on the economy and supply chain has been, and what your department has done to help the truckers, the shippers, and other industries affected by its closure.
Thank you, Chairman, Thank you, and thank you for your and this committee's attention to that situation, and certainly was glad to hear that you and other members of the subcommittee will be visiting, will participate in that visit as well as Governor Moore hosts you. The Port of Baltimore is essential to the regional economy, and it plays an important role in the national supply chain as well, especially given its specialization in the transit of vehicles. And then the bridge itself, which provides such a vital connection for people and goods, obviously missing that has a substantial impact. There are about 30,000 vehicles crossing that bridge on a daily basis. We got to work right away as soon as we got those calls in the middle of the night, and have been working with Maryland throughout to try to help them get back to normal. That's included the immediate availability of $60 million in quick release emergency relief funds for the Maryland DOT. We view that as a down payment on what we know will be the substantial cost of building a new bridge. With regard to the opening of the channel, I can tell you that while that limited access deep draft channel was open, that allowed for 19 total transit, 10 outbound ships. Some vessels were effectively stuck there because of the wreckage, as well as 9 inbound, and made it possible for more of the workers in that port to be able to do what they do best. The Army Corps of Engineers is projecting that they are on track, as I understand it, for that May opening timeline of the full channel, and that really is necessary. Even that 38-foot channel is not enough to accommodate the largest vessels and get the port and the workers who count on it back to normal. Briefly, I would just also note that through our Port Infrastructure Development Program, we were able to make funds available for paving of a cargo laydown area at a facility called Trade Point, which is one of the few parts of the port that is outside and not inside of the channel that was obstructed by the wreckage of the bridge. My understanding is that that is already now helping to move some cargo. And I would note that we continue to be in regular contact both on the supply chain side through our new multimodal freight office and our maritime administration, and then on the bridge rebuilding side through our Federal Highway Administration, and have conveyed our department's echo of the President's commitment that Baltimore and Maryland will have everything that they need on the federal side.
We'll have some other questions that we'll submit for the record on the Baltimore Bridge, and I'm sure they will follow our visit up there on Thursday. Real quickly, in my last minute, the Fiscal 24 Appropriations Act included $12 million to start the recapitalization of the National Defense Reserve Fleet, which is a project designed to help us in the Navy meet specifications and build that design out of an American shipyard. Can you give us an update on the status of this project and the timeline to get a contract awarded in these remaining 45 seconds?
I'll do my best to be brief, and knowing that you'll have our MARAD administrator before you soon, I'll just note that we take great pride in helping to fulfill that important defense mission with the Ready Reserve Fleet, and are working to recapitalize it using the resources that were provided, while candidly noting that it has been a challenge to recapitalize the vessels as quickly as they are going out of date. But my understanding is that we are on track to proceed with that, and we'll be happy to invite the Maritime Administrator to provide a more fulsome update when there's the opportunity later today.
Thank you. Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with the remarks the chairman made about the tragedy in Baltimore and the families who lost loved ones there. But I think we need to have an honest discussion here about the Emergency Relief Fund. Going into this, there was a significant backlog, and recognizing that disasters like this can and do happen, but the severity, the number and severity of natural disasters as well wearing on our resources is significant. So we need to have this discussion because there's not enough in that fund. And we can argue, oh, we want to cut spending. Well, if disasters happen, they disproportionately impact one area that simply can't handle this, but they do impact the country. So if you could give us, Secretary, a deeper understanding of the status of the Emergency Relief Fund, how you envision a supplemental at least addressing this Baltimore disaster, but perhaps also the fact that we have a backlog and that we need to recognize that that spigot, that fund has to be larger every year, just to be honest with ourselves, that it needs more money.
Thank you for the question and for your attention to the emergency relief program, which we know is so important anytime there is an incident affecting transportation like the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. For perspective in terms of the proportions that are in play, in May of 2023, FHWA provided $749 million in ER program funds to help 39 states, District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico make repairs for roads and bridges that had been damaged by storms, floods, wildfires, and other events. In January 2024, Federal Highways provided $729 million in ER program funds to help 34 states, as well as D.C., the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. The last update I got showed $950 million available in that fund, but we're tracking approximately $2 billion of unmet need, and that is not including the projected cost of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Now, to be clear, that does not necessarily mean that we would have $2 billion of requests ready to go looking for reimbursement in a single year.
What is that $2 billion?
So that's effectively a pipeline that will then be reimbursed as the states are ready and do their spending. We've had some cases where, just because of the length of time it takes to do reconstruction, checks may be going out 5 or even more years after the original incident, just through the flow of the project. But what we do see is there is a mismatch between the $950 million and the $2 billion plus and counting that we see by way of need. And so we would welcome support on ways to make sure that that fund is adequately topped up, knowing that severe weather is becoming more severe and more frequent, not less, and that even though we are separately working through programs like Protect to make our infrastructure more resilient in the first place against the kinds of threats that weather, natural disasters, and other effects can cause, we still are facing an uphill struggle and are going to need to do everything we can to be ready on the back end to respond when disaster strikes.
So if we equate this, as we often do with a household, it's like operating without insurance in a sense, and disasters do happen. What is the probable need for supplemental? And if we're going to go to that expense, what would it take to fill that fund with a reasonable amount of money, an endowment in a sense, to not have to have a wait for a supplemental when the next disaster takes place?
Well, I'd certainly concur that it would be optimal to know that the fund is being refreshed at a rate that keeps up with the needs that have come to it. Again, if we're using recent years as an index, we would see the last 2 years disbursements would have been between 700 and 800 million, but we know there is even more, and you would want, given the Francis Scott Key Bridge, and you would want some kind of cushion there. So while we have not proposed a specific supplemental at this time, that gives you a sense of the proportion that we think would be needed in order to make sure the ER fund was at a healthy level, and of course would also spare us needing to go to supplementals in the future if we knew that there were adequate balances for the unmet need that was coming in.
No, again, and those details are matter. So again, if making sure the committee knows for the future, what would it take to get the fund at a healthy level to address the needs as they hit, and what would be a normal, appropriate amount to fund that spigot every year? Thank you.
Thank you. So, being authorized at $100 million a year and then periodically being supplemented by Congress, we can work with that. But a cushion that's more in the line of the levels that we've found ourselves dispersing in recent years would help us to stay ahead of that and reduce the need for supplementals or additional work outside of the regular budget cycle.
Sheriff Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Great to see you again. And thank you for being here this morning. One of the things that I want to bring up is this issue of vehicle technology and cybersecurity. You know, these new connective vehicles, as they're called. particularly in light of the fact that China has emerged now as the largest exporter of vehicles globally, including here in the United States. And Mr. Secretary, I have to tell you, I'm concerned about the potential security risk of these connected vehicles built by the Chinese automakers and now operating in the United States, because through their massive subsidies and workforce practices, as I said, they've become the largest exporter. They're here. And these vehicles literally have the capability of being manipulated and manipulating the vehicle's life and safety systems, collect and transmit data, and implement surveillance capabilities embedded within the vehicle's technology. Now, I know the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party has sent a letter to the Department of Commerce and the Department of Defense issuing those concerns about these vehicles. Can you talk a little bit about what DOT, maybe NHTSA, whoever can really help here in America ensure, like the Chinese are doing, any vehicle data collected in China has to be stored locally. Are we requiring anything like that?
Thank you for the question. It touches on something we take very seriously, which is the safety implications of vehicle cybersecurity issues. The reality is that vehicles are becoming more and more complex and more software intensive each passing year. There's already probably been more computerization on board than many consumers were aware of, but that is only increasing. NHTSA was involved in establishing a body called the Auto ISAC, an industry data sharing partnership, which is committed to quickly identifying and responding to cybersecurity risks and threats in the nation's vehicle fleet. And NHTSA has refreshed its own updated cybersecurity best practices, which we also believe is a contribution to this issue. Working with a number of stakeholders and also updating a cybersecurity incident response plan, which makes more clear the agency's responsibilities in the event of a cyber attack or any issue that would involve safety critical systems there. I think that going forward, we need to continue assessing how best to protect consumers without, of course, hindering the technological developments that can make vehicles safer, more convenient. There's a lot of consumer demand for this, but
did they say anything about collecting data here locally? Keep it in America as opposed to going back to the CCP?
I'm not aware of restrictions in terms of how data is stored. Of course, most of our international automakers are not Chinese automakers, but you also know how many different components are finding their way into any vehicle, regardless of the OEM. So that's certainly an area that we'd welcome more dialogue on and be eager to work on.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to flip over to the EV standards and really talk about the CAFE standards that have recently been announced that everyone is, I don't want to say, I might say up in arms about, because nowhere in law did Congress authorize DOT to set fuel economy standards that effectively mandate EVs while at the same time will force the internal combustion engine out of the market. In fact, Mr. Secretary, federal statute expressly prohibits NHTSA from considering the fuel economy of EVs when determining maximum feasible CAFE standards for passenger cars and trucks. Now, can you give me a little update on the CAFE standards? What are they finally going to boil down to? And how does DOT plan to implement such a massive move to EVs without consumer buy-in, really? Because as we've all seen, so few really want to buy them at this point.
Well, I do think it's important to note that every year more Americans choose EVs than the year before, and very few Americans who choose an EV decide to go back. But I do want to agree and note that, as you correctly stated, NHTSA does not take EVs into account when it's formulating CAFE standards. They're about the quality of an internal combustion engine. The rule that was proposed would require a fleet-wide average of 58 miles per gallon by 2032. I know that seems aggressive, but frankly, every cafe...
To say the least.
Yeah, but that's exactly what they said when we outrageously suggested that you could get 20 miles a gallon back in the 80s or 90s. So every time we raise the bar, we find that industry is able to meet it. And it's remarkable the innovation that goes on. But ultimately, we believe these are about not just cleaner air, but saving Americans money by having more efficient gas engines. And we know that these gas cars are going to be on the road a long time, even as the EV market share grows, which is part of why we continue to think it's important to meet our statutory responsibility with the CAFE standards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to you. I look forward to working with you. It's good to see you, Mr. Secretary. It's always good to
Likewise.
see you. Thank you for your visit to New Jersey. Let's make it happen again. Through the funding from both the bipartisan infrastructure and the budget, your department has been able to provide really good union jobs to many people in this country, uplifting our working class families. While lifting them up is vitally important, it's also very important that we are inclusive. And for those communities which have been marginalized, particularly Black and brown, we want to make sure that they are reaping the benefit of this wonderful work under this administration. Can you please discuss the Department of Transportation's ongoing efforts to ensure that members of historically marginalized communities, again, especially Black and brown, and even women in non-traditional jobs, are being included in the efforts to uplift the America's working class?
Well, thank you. This continues to be a very important consideration for us, and as we advance initiatives like the President's Justice 40 commitment, always, of course, being mindful of the statutory authority behind it, we believe we continue to have extraordinary opportunities to lift up communities that have been passed over, or in some cases even harmed by the transportation decisions of past generations. And we know that when we do that, nobody is made worse off, and a lot of people are better off. In terms of how we can best do that, that has included measures like technical assistance to help communities that aren't wealthy enough to have sometimes the most well-heeled federal relations organizations, for example, still be able to compete and win in our discretionary grant processes. It means, to the extent permitted by statute, considering the areas of persistent poverty or other factors that have placed an area at a disadvantage, and generally ensuring that all community voices are heard in the proposals for projects that are coming forward. And I really believe that we are turning a corner as a country in terms of how we make sure that federal dollars benefit everybody and not just the few or the well-off.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. How is the department measuring the success of those efforts?
Well, this is, first of all, again, I would point to Justice 40 because that has set a clear goal for us as an administration. And that is being tracked not just in our department, but on a government-wide basis. The White House has updated its covered program list, and 40 of those programs are in the U.S. DOT alone, and they're subject to a level of data gathering that can help us understand the impacts of the choices that we're making. We're also making sure that we just track the level of projects that are moving through the different stages to make sure that those are in lower capacity or lower wealth communities are not systematically encountering more issues. We know that can happen just because they have sometimes fewer resources, less experience working with federal programs. And we're actively engaging those who don't succeed in some of our applications through debriefs, knowing that often it's on a second or third attempt that a community, especially a low-income community, can successfully get these kinds of federal funds.
So what is it that you all are doing to be able to demonstrate whether or not you're being successful in accomplishing what I believe is your noble and genuine goal? My issue has always been working in this field myself years ago, that we put in these good faith efforts, but we missed the mark when it comes time to actually showing where the dollars went, where the contracts went. So how are we measuring that, sir? What is your department doing to collect that information, and is it available for us to peruse?
So I certainly agree that often we see the phrase good faith effort used, but we don't always see the results. So we've held ourselves to a higher standard, beginning with the dollars that we have the most visibility and control over, which is, of course, our direct contracting dollars. There we set a 20% goal. We're transparent about how we're doing on that, and I'm pleased to report we've exceeded that goal, and we're thinking about how to take it higher in terms of the proportion of grants that go to SDBs, small and disadvantaged businesses. We're likewise encouraging our project sponsors, who, of course, handle the bulk of the money, states, cities, airport authorities, transit agencies, to do the same. And our recently revised DBE and ACDBE rule contains provisions to make sure we have good data going forward, too. The balance we're trying to strike, of course, is we don't want to make it harder for those very same businesses with overly burdensome data reporting requirements, but we do want to make sure we have and can publish enough data to really see how we're doing in that regard. And would be happy to share with your office more granular numbers, especially about the progress we've made in our own contracting.
Thank you. Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. Texas has the greatest increase in population than any other state in the country. And I was a little shocked to learn that the chairman of TxDOT hasn't had an opportunity to meet you and have a conversation with you. Would you be willing to get on a call with myself, your team, and the chairman of TxDOT, an introductory call?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Typically engage with leaders of state DOTs in the context of AASHTO, but if there's a more specific issue we can work, or you'd just like to arrange an introduction, I'd be happy to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Mr. Secretary, San Antonio, Texas is home to one of the largest military populations in the nation. As a 20-year Navy veteran, it is critical, I know that it is critical that we equip our military personnel with the tools they need to succeed. One of those tools is travel, and we have yet to see a direct flight added to the DCA to San Antonio. There are a significant number of personnel that travel back and forth from San Antonio to our nation's capital. It is critical that we make this as painless as possible for our men and women in uniform. Currently, there are discussions about adding a direct flight between San Antonio and DCA. I'm in full support of that. My question for you is, do you believe it is important for our military men and women to have direct access to our nation's capital?
Well, having traveled on orders myself, I certainly recognize and appreciate the importance of good air travel and other travel options for our military members.
Excellent. My next question is, my district is massive. It's larger than the state of Pennsylvania. I have 29 counties. 27 of those counties are rural. Livestock plays a very important role in our economy. For years, livestock has relied on an exemption to the electronic logging device, ELD rule. Without these exceptions for livestock carriers, there is a risk of animals being left without proper grazing accommodations or becoming subject to other health risks. Mr. Secretary, do you have any plans to grant an exception to livestock haulers for the ELD rules in fiscal year 2025?
Certainly am aware of the unique issues that livestock haulers face when you have living cargo. It's a little bit different than boxes and inanimate objects, and I think that's contemplated in the practices of FMCSA. I'm not aware of any change to the current practice that is forthcoming in terms of some of the flexibilities. Of course, what we're trying to do is balance the importance of livestock with the importance of safety, and those ELDs are there for safety reasons. But we continually seek to strike the right balance to be reasonable in our flexibilities and yet demonstrate our commitment to the life safety issues that are implicated in any of our regulations with FMCSA.
Excellent. I also represent a large part of the Texas-Mexico border, nearly half of the overall Texas-Mexico border, and trade and commerce is a big part of that. Big function of trade and commerce is the infrastructure that builds out to that and the level of different roads. And I'd ask that you take a look at that as we're reviewing, updating USMCA and some of these other trade partnerships. It's so critical that we have the infrastructure built out, right? As we nearshore from other places, not only nearshore to America, but also North America. I think it's critical that we look to our partners to the south and how do we have this infrastructure once again built out. We can't just turn a switch off and turn it on without that investment in there. So I look forward to working with you and your team on these projects and others. And thank you once again for coming before the committee. And I look forward to that call. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks very much.
Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Chairman, and I also want to congratulate you on your new position. I hope that you are kind to us when it comes to community projects.
I started by getting your name right.
Yes, thank you. Uh, Secretary, it's really great to see you again, and I really look forward to hosting you in my district when the Bright Line project finishes. And I hope that you and I and my colleague here can work together to ensure that we move this project as fast as the train will travel. So, on time, on budget, all of that. As you know, I represent SoCal's Inland Empire. You visited my district a couple of years ago, and we were fortunate to receive a $15 million award for a pedestrian bridge that was so desperately needed. We are the suburbs of workers that work in Los Angeles, and they travel to 40, 50, 60 miles one way to work. I represent a freight corridor, so anything that happens at the Port of LA and Long Beach impact my district. Alameda Corridor runs and splits my district in half. So you can imagine the needs that we have as you have seen them yourself. In fiscal year 23 funding package, I secured a transit-oriented development pilot program with over $13 million of funding. It's a pilot program. Transit-oriented development is important, as you know, for bringing transit and affordable housing together, which is what we desperately need in the Inland Empire. Can you provide us an update on the department's transit-oriented development pilot program, and have you worked with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to ensure that we are coordinating the goal of this pilot program?
Thank you. And the short answer on working with HUD is yes. I've spoken with both Acting Secretary Todman and before that Secretary Fudge about this, because we recognize the relationship between housing affordability and transportation options. Specifically with regard to the program, just recently, in fact, earlier this month, FTA announced $17.6 million in grants going to 20 communities in 16 states to support equitable transit-oriented development. And the goal is to, again, try to integrate our thinking about what are the two biggest costs for most households taken together, housing and transportation. The overall funding for that program is $68.9 million provided by the IIJA, which is a substantial increase over the prior 5 years. I would also note that we have credit programs in the Build America Bureau, which can also be used to support transit-oriented development. We hope to be able to make an announcement in the coming days about a project that will go forward based on that. So we certainly believe in the importance of transit solutions to help with housing affordability, and welcome the opportunity to continue working to bring that to your constituents.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This pilot program was so successful that I look forward to working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to put it into law to ensure that we continue to support. By the way, the 16 states that receive this funding in communities across those 16 states, none of them were from SoCal's Inland Empire. We didn't apply, and we didn't apply because, again, what you talked about in your opening statement, the need for assistance in filling out these lengthy applications. I can't stress to you how much we need to ensure that we simplify the processes, that we simplify the reporting options that we have currently available for our communities, because it is not sustainable for smaller cities like the ones that I represent. I also want to ask if you have a status on another program that we funded, and that's the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator, a program that was created for the development of regionally regional projects to get cities to work together.
Thank you. Yes, that's also part of the Build America Bureau that I mentioned earlier. That program accelerates project delivery and helps clear barriers. In October, we were able to announce another step forward, thereby expanding the RAA program to 24 accelerators, receiving $24 million in new funding. And we look forward to continuing to develop that program. Also, with regard to your earlier note, I appreciate the opportunity to mention our belief in the Thriving Communities program and how that has helped link many of these communities up to support for navigating those sometimes challenging federal processes.
Mayors get things done, and with that, I yield back.
Amen.
Thank you, Congressman.
And amen. Mr. Valadeo.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for your time today. I really appreciate you taking some time to be with us today. Mr. Secretary, the state of California has adopted a regulation targeting emissions of locomotives, and they are seeking authorization from EPA to begin enforcing that regulation. The regulation requires that railroads operating in California must quickly begin adopting zero-emission technology for locomotives, technology that is currently not commercially available. The EPA authorizes, if the EPA authorizes California's regulation, supply chains across the country would be endangered due to the operational and financial restraints placed on the railroads. For that reason, numerous groups representing manufacturers, businesses, farmers, ranchers weighed in, with the EPA expressing significant concerns. One of the reasons why I bring this up is 65% of the national locomotive fleet touches California. And we're obviously 40 million people. We have major ports all along the coast. Moving products, I think 167 million tons of freight that were moved by rail in California in 2021. Employs thousands of people. It's huge for our economy. Where do you stand on this, and how do you plan to move forward on this? Hopefully some common sense will prevail here.
So when it comes to railroad regulation, our authorities mostly relate to the physical safety and safe operation of locomotives and railroads, and are in that sense neutral to forms of propulsion or air pollution issues that might be the jurisdiction of the EPA. I would have to refer you to the EPA for anything more on their rule. I'm not as familiar with it. Again, given that our authorities typically have more to do with
I
physical
understand
safety.
that it is the EPA that's going to have this position, but you're the one that's going to be left holding the bag when, again, it's controlling or having an impact on not just California citizens across the country. If 65% of the locomotives in the country are touching California and are being delayed because of having either changed engines or completely remove engines off the fleet, it's going to have an impact, and you're going to be the one to blame, because when they think locomotives, they don't think EPA. They're thinking Secretary of Transportation.
I mean, our experience in this regard probably is mostly more in the realm of the CAFE rule that I was discussing with Mr. Rutherford. Certainly, corporations tend to resist regulations to have cleaner air. Our job is to try to make sure that we strike a reasonable balance between what's feasible and what's going to lead to fewer harms from pollution. And certainly are hopeful that our supply chains can become both more efficient and greener at the same time. But again, I say that without professing to have more knowledge than I do about the pending EPA rule or California rule.
So 1.6 billion tons of goods are moved nationwide, and the EPA's own numbers, only 2% was from locomotives of all the greenhouse gas emissions. So we're talking about a very small amount. I mean, you can move a huge amount of goods with very little fuel, but they play such a vital role. Over the last few years, and I know your office was really helpful on this, but we struggled a lot with moving goods. We had cattle all across California were running out of feed at feed mills because we move in so many goods from Canada and from the Midwest to feed animals. But there was even a point in time where we were on the verge of running out of cement at our concrete plants to stop construction in our major areas. I mean, these are things that have a huge impact on housing prices, food, every other item that is on a storefront. And when you look at greenhouse gas emissions, locomotives are such a small part of it, but when you look at the overall part of what they play in moving goods across the country, this is a huge issue for us, and we have to take this with, we really do have to pay some attention to it. And shifting just a little bit, you were in Vegas the other day for the high-speed rail. One comment that you made that stood out to me, because high-speed rail in California, they broke ground in 2015, was that this was going to be the first true high-speed rail. What do you mean by that, and why is California, 10 years into this project, construction already started, Why is Las Vegas is going to be done before ours?
Well, Las Vegas is the Las Vegas to Rancho Cucamonga project follows a unique right-of-way, the bulk of which is actually basically shooting down the middle of the median of I-15. It's part of how they were able to establish the project timelines that they were. So my remark, I should, to be very specific, it is not the first true high-speed rail to break ground. What I mean by that is we project, be the first high-speed rail to be in service in terms of revenue rise. Their goal is to be in operation by 2028. They've got an eye on the Olympics, and so we're excited that that would be happening sooner. The North-South project, which we also believe in, are investing in, but recognize has a much more complex right-of-way picture, is on a longer timeline than the Right Line West project.
All right. Thank you, and I yield back.
Now let's have a real Pete-to-Pete conversation. Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to your leadership and your tenure in this committee. I've indicated to you privately I want you to be successful. Whether that means you want me to be for you or against you, I will do whatever is best for you. Secretary Buttigieg, good to see you again. As former Mayor Torres mentioned, it was good to be in your company at that Bright Line event, and I want to thank Mr. Valadeo for the segue in this question that I have. The California delegation is incredibly excited to play a role in bringing the Olympic and Paralympic Games to Southern California in 2028. The LA Olympic Organizing Committee is already fully engaged in the planning process. Historically, the federal government has provided significant resources to support and ensure the safety and success of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Just thinking ahead about the department and their preparations for LA 28 Olympic transportation needs, how are you thinking through that? Realizing that this is always difficult. These are not annual things, but clearly this is a significant event. It was equal to 7 Super Bowls over a short period of time, and the significant challenges that we have. How are you guiding the department in thinking about the LA 28 Olympics?
Well, thank you for the question. And as you note, the Olympic Games are just a massive undertaking that requires a lot of forward thinking about how to move people around efficiently and safely. DOT, in particular, our Federal Transit Administration, have been working with the Olympic Organizing Committee, LA 28, since early 2023. Just had a conversation the other day, most recently with that committee, myself. And I should note there's an intergovernmental working group that's been set up by the White House to try to make sure that transportation, security, and other needs faced by the organizers are well coordinated on the federal side. We've had DOT staff tour the expected venues, housing, and transportation projects recently, and are committed to working with the LA region to make these the best Olympic and Paralympic Games in American history. A couple things of note: they have declared their intention to expand transit in the region to meet the needs for these games. So they are establishing a Games bus route network to provide the ability to reach relevant destinations and hubs. There's also the supplemental bus system, or SBS concept. We'll continue to work with LA to address the challenges that come with that, basically mobilizing vehicles borrowed from other jurisdictions, trying to help make sure they can navigate funding, availability of vehicles, drivers, and mechanics, and just the logistics of borrowing buses from other transit operators in other jurisdictions. I'd also note there are plans to establish mobility hubs that will create inclusivity for all of the suburbs and the outlying communities that are going to play a very important role in the games. And we're pleased to see that the GM of LA Metro has been working hard to try to turn LA's resources to work for what we think could be a chance to really showcase what 21st century transportation can look like under the kind of pressure that the foot traffic associated with the games can cause.
And we want that to be successful. What resources do you anticipate needing from this committee in order to make that happen? Specifically, the bus program that you mentioned, it's been discussed about resources.
That certainly is one where funding could play an important role. We'd be happy to work with this committee and work with the organizers, depending on what funding Congress could make available, just because we're talking about a lot of vehicles and a lot of pieces that have to come into place. We're also working to just make sure we have the technical expertise and assistance in place, and think that working group and that regular cadence of contact is going to serve us well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. is Representative Torres mentioned, and again, Mr. Valadeo alluded to, we were at that Brightline event. I appreciate in your testimony, I also wanted to highlight that you discussed the project creating 35,000 jobs, lowering our carbon footprint and bringing communities closer together. Is the DOT distributes funds from the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, how do we ensure that communities and transportation agencies at the state level are working together for that shared goal of lowering emissions while connecting communities?
Well, we certainly find that every state has a different strategy for addressing air pollution and carbon emissions. So we're trying to meet them where they are, and at the same time ensure that there's that every statutory high bar is met. Often we find there are projects that the states have been wanting to do for a long time, but until the IIJA just didn't have the resources for. And so whether we're talking about longstanding programs like the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, or things like the Protect grants on resilience that didn't exist before the bill. We're mobilizing every tool that we can, and also I would mention, in addition to our state partners, sometimes directly engaging cities, transit agencies, airport authorities, especially if we find that they have maybe a higher level of climate ambition than their respective state capitals, and we want to make sure we're supporting them too.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pete. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I want to ask a couple of questions about the 6th District of Virginia and the way that various national events are impacting transportation in the 6th. We all are concerned about the bridge collapse, the tragedy involving the 6 deaths and the billions of dollars in damage, effectively closing the Port of Baltimore, affecting $100 to $200 million in cargo every day. Understand that this could have some impact on rail traffic in Western Virginia. Union officials say some coal trains are being rerouted through Roanoke to coal piers in Norfolk. It could require Norfolk Southern to double the amount of export coal loaded each month at the Lambert Point terminal. With coal, Baltimore is the #2 port, but Norfolk is the #1 port. And it's my understanding that CSX and Norfolk Southern are the 2 main coal carriers in the region. Can you tell us how you've been working with the railroads in the Port of Norfolk to ensure not only that Norfolk plays an integral role there in accommodating a lot of the traffic from Baltimore, and that there's a seamless transition there, but how we can ensure that rail is able to accommodate without delays, in particular to passenger rail that's grown quite a bit in that area as well.
Thanks, and yes, this is not only a shipping picture, but really has impacted rail, trucking, every form of freight transportation. The week of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, I convened supply chain stakeholders from across the spectrum, as well as across the region and the country, not just the ports, but for this very reason. We had rail, trucking, and cargo owners and other representatives there. I will say I've been impressed by how various ports, including Virginia ports, have stepped up to absorb some of that temporarily diverted cargo, and not just what that means in terms of port capacity, but the railroad and also trucking elements of that as well. Just to convey how complex it can be, there are actually some processes in the automotive finishing process that take place on the grounds of the Port of Baltimore that can't easily be moved, such that vehicles that were absorbed in Georgia or in Rhode Island because they couldn't get to Baltimore coming off the ships still had to be trucked to Baltimore in order to be finished and then trucked back out. And obviously they had to do that without the benefit of having the Key Bridge, which serves so much of that cargo. So at the working level, our multimodal freight office, which was newly created by the IIJA, has been a very important tool that's helped us to have those conversations, that dialogue. And we find that all the different players have stepped up very effectively to absorb what we certainly expect is a temporary but not trivial impact.
Now, when it comes to road transportation, Interstate 81 it has been overburdened by truck traffic for decades now. Originally built for around 15% truck traffic, it accommodates over 30, 40, sometimes even 50% truck traffic, depending on the day of the week, traveling up to the northeast from points south. But and while we are working to add a 3rd lane, and would appreciate your cooperation with that, traffic fatalities are up on 81. NHTSA estimated that nearly 41,000 people died in traffic crashes nationwide in 2023. What are NHTSA's plans to reduce fatalities impacted by crashes? Is widening one of those ways that you all are seeking to reduce crashes? And can you speak to the department's support for adding that third lane to 81?
Thanks. NHTSA is very focused on reversing the rise in roadway deaths that we've experienced in recent years. The data are suggesting we have finally come off the peak, but am certainly not satisfied with the current level of roadway death in this country. About 40,000 people, which means roughly the equivalent of a fully loaded airliner every single day. And a number that I should also add is significantly higher than our peer developed countries. Our strategy for addressing that has 5 elements: safer roads, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer people, including drivers, and then a higher standard of post-crash care.
And that first thing that you mentioned, safer roads, wouldn't adding additional lanes mileage be part of that?
Potentially, yes. It certainly depends on the project and the specifics, but we want to make sure that there's a healthy and safe flow of traffic on any interstate.
Let me ask one more question before my time expires that impacts the Roanoke Airport, because we do have flights that go through Reagan National. The FAA recently issued an analysis of adding more daily round-trip flights to Reagan National. It found that 5 more round trips would result in an extra 12 hours of delays each day. It's already the 10th most delayed airport in the country. It would have a negative impact on safety at the airport. Just a few weeks ago, there was a near collision between 2 commercial flights on a runway with 819 daily takeoffs, more than LAX, Newark, or O'Hare. It's clear that Reagan National's runway is the busiest in the nation, already ranks 3rd for runway incursions. Can you comment on the administration's position on adding those extra 5 slots?
Yes, we certainly recognize and respect the role of Congress in determining the availability of slots. I would note, having spent time up in that tower at DCA, that it really is an exceptionally, as you noticed, not only an exceptionally busy, but airstrip in terms of that one runway, the hardest working runway in the national airspace. We would be concerned about the pressure that could put on the system. Of course, we stand ready to make good on whatever Congress provides.
Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you. First, I want to thank you for your recent compensation program for flights delay and cancel, and the dashboard page that you have available for consumers. I think it's important that we help consumers as delays and cancellations continue to occur. But thank you for that, and I also obviously want to thank you, express my sincerity for including $496 million in the proposed funding for Second Avenue Subway. And thank you for coming to Harlem. That's an important project that will obviously connect Harlem to the rest of the world. And I also want to stress to my colleagues in the committee that this also provides a social equity component that I think is so important to the communities that we represent, those that have been left behind for far too long, and that need for these projects not just to be a transportation project for a transportation desert, but an economic stimulus for the communities that we serve. And I thank you for your vision and the president's vision for this particular model. Given the complex nature of urban subway expansions, what measures are being implemented to ensure that Second Avenue Subway Phase 2 remains on schedule and within budget?
Well, thank you for your ongoing support for this effort, and it was an absolute joy and one of the highlights of my time here to be able to celebrate that signature with people who had been waiting for so long in the case of the Second Avenue Subway, and finally seeing that funding. Now all eyes are on delivery, and that means making sure that we maintain a tight cadence of interaction and collaboration with MTA and all of the players involved in that. We're doing that through our Federal Transit Administration, but this is also a big enough project that is being tracked at an agency-wide level too. We know that hurdles and issues can come up. We stand committed to working through any of those to make sure that this is delivered now that the funding is in place, because the people of those Harlem communities and really that whole part of New York that is served up to 125th Street deserve finally seeing that project through after having waited literally for decades in order to see it become real.
Well, I hope the subway leaves the station fairly soon, Mr. Secretary. But I have another question. As you know, I represent a district that has a significant number of Dominican Americans, and as you know, the Department of State and the government of the Dominican Republic are in final talks for a long-anticipated modern U.S.-DR open skies agreement. The cost of flying back home for many of these families is exuberant. When they go visit their families back home, sometimes they have to pay $1,500 to $2,000. So a family of four is going to have a difficult time going back home. And I want to know, given the evolving dynamics of international air travel, what strategies are in place to ensure the effective implementation of the modernized U.S.-DR Open Skies Agreement?
Thank you. I know how important this is, especially to Dominican communities in the U.S. and to the Dominican Republic, and have had direct conversations with my counterparts from the Dominican Republic about the importance of this. Our department and our interagency partners at State and Commerce are all participating in these negotiations. We've been negotiating for some time. We're very encouraged by recent progress, though we're not there quite yet. And the real focus is to make sure that we can get to a good place while maintaining the essential elements of a U.S. Open Skies Agreement and the policies that have helped to define that through us in our relationships with all of the countries where we have an air transport agreement. So we're looking forward to getting to conclusion on a modernized agreement for what is the largest Caribbean market for U.S. travelers. And Open Skies would certainly further facilitate travel and tourism by promoting competition and, we think, creating more affordable options for travelers.
Thank you. And finally, could you elaborate how the Federal Highway Administration investment will help to advance environmental restoration and cleanup within our nation's highways?
Yes, thank you. Often there is a brownfield element to some of the grants that we are pursuing, including federal highways. That's one of the things that, pursuant to our statutory authority, can help a project to score well in discretionary programs. And we certainly value chances to work with project sponsors to make sure that cleanups are, where required, part of the benefit of a transportation project for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Siscomani.
Thank you, Chairman, and glad to see you in this committee as well. I know you've been serving for a while, and it was great serving with you on FSGG, so great to be working with you here as well. Thank you. And thank you, Secretary Buttigieg, for being here today. First, I actually want to thank you, offer you our gratitude in Arizona for, it's great to see the I-10, as you know, a main corridor here for us in our state, both for commerce and for tourism, for safety reasons, all of the above, receive a desperately needed funding for widening earlier this year. So I want to thank you for that. The grant will go a long way in improving safety, travel, and commerce, like I mentioned. This was long overdue, so I do want to once again thank your department for prioritizing this important issue for Arizona. Now, Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you're aware that there was recently a major train derailment along the Arizona-New Mexico border in which a train carrying cars of hazardous material fell off the tracks, caught fire, and consequently closed down parts of the I-40, which is an essential route for trade and commerce. Many Arizona and New Mexico residents, as well as Navajo Nation tribal members, have been evacuated from their homes, and many more are concerned about the health effects that this derailment will have on their neighborhoods moving forward. While I'm grateful for the fact that local first responders took immediate and effective action to ensure that no one was injured, train derailment after train derailment should not be the new normal. In America, our transportation safety standards should be the gold standard, but the American people are rightfully beginning to lose faith in that standard when they see incidents like this one in Arizona putting their communities at risk. What are you specifically changing within your department to ensure something like this never happens again?
Well, thank you for the question. I passionately agree that there needs to be more done to secure rail safety and to prevent derailments and other accidents. In regards to this particular incident, that day I was in touch with the leadership of the Navajo Nation as well as Arizona and New Mexico. Our FRA administrator was on site yesterday and will continue to engage. That stretch of I-40 is back open, but there continue, of course, to be effects due to that derailment and that fire. Within the department, we've taken a number of steps, some of which we were working on from day one, others accelerated in the wake of the East Palestine, Ohio derailment. That's included focused inspection programs, including a focused review of the phase-in of robust tank cars that can handle the transportation of hazardous materials, as well as a route assessment for high-hazard flammable trains. Railroad by railroad, we've been conducting safety assessments and acting on the findings of those assessments. And I'm pleased to note that just a couple of days ago, we welcomed a new partner to our C3RS, or Confidential Close Call Reporting System, as BNSF agreed to join that pilot following the lead of Norfolk Southern. I will say, though, that the overall rates are an extreme concern. With the exception of Norfolk Southern, we have not seen a dramatic reduction in derailments in the last year with Class 1 railroads. In fact, for many, if not all of them, the rate has gone up. That's one reason that I take every opportunity to renew my urgent call for Congress to act on the Bipartisan Railway Safety Act. We will continue to do everything that we can that doesn't require an act of Congress. But given that it's been more than a year since East Palestine, we strongly believe that it is time for Congress to act, because that bipartisan legislation would give us a stronger hand and more tools to try to drive down that accident rate. I don't think most Americans realize that there were derailments on a daily basis in this country until what happened in Ohio, and every community that lives near a railroad, including where I grew up, is asking whether they're safe.
Well, I agree with you that there's a heightened attention on this, and certainly in Arizona, we're seeing the effects of the rates that you're mentioning. I do want to urge you and your team to prioritize rail safety, which it seems that you have a clear understanding of the rates going up on that, and get boots on the ground as soon as possible to see what the community is dealing with in Arizona as soon as you can. And as a result of this incident, analyze how DOT can do better moving forward, which I'm, by your notes, it seems that that's what you're doing. I'd love to work with you on this. And I do have another question, but we're running out of time, and I know votes were called, sir, so we'll, it may take more than 30 seconds, so I'll wait for the second round if that's okay.
Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Chairman Womack. Congratulations to you. I have no doubt you will continue Chairman Cole's high standard of leadership for this great subcommittee. As members of the committee may know, last year I was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. I describe it as Parkinson's on steroids, and I don't recommend it. PSP makes it very difficult for me to speak, so I use an assistive app so that I can participate and you can understand me. I want to thank the chair and the ranking member for allowing me to do so today. Secretary Buttigieg, it's great to see you again. I want to take a moment to thank you on behalf of the father and father-to-be in my office for taking parental leave not long after you and Chasen adopted your 2 kids as newborns. Even though you didn't take anything close to the 12 weeks that your staff would, it was still a great example to set. I was also happy to read recently that although you are not the stay-at-home parent, you give the twins their bath every night. I'm intrigued that you composed a bath time song. My husband was a stay-at-home dad when our kids were young, and when they were toddlers, bath time was my special time with them. I'm not creative enough to compose my own song, but my bath time selection was I Like You by Ernie and Bert from Sesame Street, and yes, I sang both parts. If you're ever looking for another bath time song, I highly recommend it. I also want to thank you for the recent alternative PNTRFP that DOT released. We've spoken about this critical vulnerability several times before, and I'm excited to see things moving forward to address it thanks to you and the department's leadership. It's an exciting time to be a passenger rail supporter in Virginia. At the end of the last year, and in large part thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, 2 major awards were announced through the Federal State Partnership Program, for the expansion of Long Bridge, and for high-speed rail service between Richmond and Raleigh. The FRA also awarded 2 grants to extend the DC to Roanoke Amtrak line to Bristol and establish daily Cardinal line service, which travels right through my district in Manassas. Just yesterday, it was announced that Amtrak Virginia had its highest ridership ever this past March, with over 123,000 passengers. As you know, Union Station is the second busiest rail station in the country. We're all aware that it has significant infrastructure needs, yet it is getting no direct funding from the infrastructure law. I was glad to see the environmental impact statement and record of decision in March, but that's just one step towards the much-needed expansion project. We all want to maximize the investments in Virginia that I mentioned, as well as all the work that's being done in the Northeast Corridor, but we won't be able to if Union Station remains a bottleneck. My question for you is, how can DOT, FRA, our regional delegation, and other important partners like Amtrak work together to identify funding solutions for this critical project?
Thank you for the question. First, let me just note my admiration for the courage and spirit that you have shown in confronting your diagnosis and continuing to be an effective leader here in Congress, and for your kind words about my family. With regard to Union Station, we recognize its importance really as not just a regional but a national transportation center. And while we're glad that the President's budget proposes to reserve a $15 million set-aside for immediate state of good repair projects, as you are well aware, the ultimate needs at Union Station are at another order of magnitude. The completion of the EIS is certainly an important step. And I've been in dialogue with the District of Columbia and other stakeholders about how to best position Union Station for long-term success. That's going to include working to make sure that they are not just on top of addressing some end-of-life station infrastructure, but really preparing the vision for what the future can look like in ways that would qualify for discretionary funds. And of course, we'd welcome opportunities to work with appropriators on any source of funding that could help get that done. There's little question that it will require multiple sources, federal, district, Amtrak, and others. Certainly that's an eligibility for Amtrak with the Amtrak grants, but we know how many different needs they're trying to cover on the Amtrak side as well, and we'll maintain that dialogue to try to make progress there. Thank you.
I also want to thank you for your and the administration's steadfast support for our nation's transit systems and transit workers. Transit workers deserve to be treated with respect and to be free from violence, injury, and harassment in the workplace. I was very glad to see the FTA announce a final rule earlier this month, taking major steps to protect transit workers, including giving workers an equal seat at the table with transit agencies in identifying and addressing safety and policy issues. How do you see this rule making things safer for transit workers and riders, and how can this subcommittee support that goal?
Well, thank you for the question, for your support of transit workers. We believe this rule is an important step forward in giving transit workers the right kinds of protections and the right kind of voice, participating in the newer structures that have been created by legislation, including committee processes, so that any kind of safety critical needs are addressed in a way that has to include the voice of transit workers. Operators have been through so much, and we think it's very important to back them, and believe it's absolutely possible to back them and hear them while also meeting the needs of management and operating these agencies. And I should note that I was thinking of them and of your longtime advocacy yesterday when the family minivan became unavailable, and I found myself on a WMATA bus in the morning and the Metro in the afternoon, getting my kids back and forth from daycare. And that bus was full of people who count on it every single day.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Jennifer, you are a valued member of this subcommittee, and I share in the Secretary's remarks about your courage and your willingness to continue to participate. And I, for one, am thankful for the technology that has been developed that allows you to be that valued and important member of this subcommittee. Thank you so much. We are going to be called for votes here in 3 or 4 minutes, which means in typical congressional fashion, we probably got a good half hour left if we need it. And Mr. Joyce walks in just in time to go have a seat, and I'll call on you here, Mr. Joyce. If anybody at the dais has a burning question that they would like to ask in round 2, I'm going to be able to yield that. And so, Ms. Watson-Coleman, I'll recognize you first. Just be as brief as you can so that we can get, oh, I know you are. And you are recognized. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Buttigieg, you know what I'm going to ask about. I'm going to ask about Mercer Airport. For 3 years, we've been trying to get that infrastructure built. We were told most recently that we asked for too much for this size airport. I needed to know, is there sort of a metrics where size equals the maximum amount you can be awarded? That's number one. Number two is, can I have a conversation with someone who will kind of guide me as to how to direct this airport to ask for the right amount to get this infrastructure? You know how much we need it? We deal with 400,000 people a year now, looking to double that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was that quick enough?
Thank you. I'll try to likewise be concise. There's, of course, no way that I could miss out on the importance of Mercer Airport after you hosted us for a visit there, and I saw both the importance of it to passengers there and the needs. With regard to successfully receiving a discretionary grant, it is often the case that a project might be rescoped in dialogue with the partner to try to get the size to something that is enough to get something done, but also fits within the program given all of the different grants that are needed. Without knowing all of the details of the most recent application, you certainly have my commitment to make sure that there is a good debrief, which we would welcome your office participating in as well, to try to get them the best possible information about how to put their best foot forward for any upcoming rounds of discretionary grants.
Thank you. Mr. Joyce is ready. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Womack, and I apologize for being late. I was at a defense hearing, and certainly apologize to you, sir. Mr. Secretary, in FY19, the Department of Transportation launched the Port Infrastructure Development Program. Since then, the department has distributed more than $2 billion to port authorities, tribal, state, and local governments and private companies. While 72% of those funds have gone to the West and East Coast, only 8% of those funds have gone to the Great Lakes ports over the last 5 years. I'm concerned that these funds are not being distributed in a regionally equitable manner. Given the concerning disparity, what should we in the Great Lakes region be telling our local communities?
Well, as you know, Representative, I'm myself a creature of the Great Lakes. I grew up in Indiana, live in Michigan, met my spouse in Chicago soon after he'd returned from Milwaukee, and I know how important those facilities are. I will say that while the dollar amounts can vary on our grants, especially when you consider the different size ports that we support, the Great Lakes ports characteristically have been punching above their weight, not just in the value they add to the American economy, but also in the last couple of rounds of the PIDP program. Now, that of course doesn't mean that every application was successful, but what I will say is that we recognize that America's supply chains and the importance of our ports isn't just about the well-publicized matter of the large container ships that are bearing down often on ports like LA and Long Beach, but the traffic that goes on, often bulk traffic that traverses the Great Lakes, and that we also, of course, support through our management of the U.S. side of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway, which links those to the Atlantic. And we're certainly happy to provide debriefs to any port that was hopeful of a grant recently is going to try to come back for another round. Again, noting that these ports have really demonstrated their often small but mighty character, both in our programs and just in their contributions to U.S. shipping.
Well, can you describe any actions your department has taken to ensure and improve the equitable distribution of federal grant assistance under the program?
Well, one thing I did was sat with the representatives of Great Lakes Ports, make sure that my staff and I had an opportunity to hear about the pride they rightfully take and the value they add, and to share some thoughts on how our programs are structured and how to make sure that they do well and continue to grow their share at a project by project or port by port level. Also, would be happy to engage, and would note that our GLS administrator is himself a veteran of the Great Lakes Ports world, and we just see a ton of opportunity there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I apologize again for being late, sir.
Mr. Siscomani.
Great. Thank you, Chair, for this second opportunity. Mr. Secretary, my question is around rest stops and rest areas. As you know, Arizona is one of the fastest growing states in the country, and such, it's got pressing needs in transportation. Now, Arizona DOT needs more financial resources, and it's looking at creative ways to bring in additional revenue. And also, you may know that many states in the Northeast, especially along the I-95 corridor, have commercialized rest areas. And they add convenience, safety, and more importantly, a revenue stream for states to utilize them. However, because of a 1956 federal regulation, some western states like Arizona can't commercialize their rest areas. While some states produce revenue because of these rest areas, Arizona is burdened with the cost of these areas. I kind of see this as a double standard, to be honest with you. That's what it strikes me as. So all I'm looking for is, can you commit to working with me to address this disparity through the appropriations process or the surface transportation reauthorization?
Yes, as you know, this relates to federal law that prohibits that kind of commercialization, knowing that there's a great interest in provisions that would either open up additional exceptions or change that provision. We'd welcome any request to provide technical assistance and work with you in your office on that.
Excellent. We'll follow up offline here as well, so we can work on something. This is something that Arizona has been working on for a long time. We've worked with different secretaries on this and different Congresses. We haven't been able to get the result that we need on this. So I'm looking forward to working with you on that and hopefully get it done.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Likewise.
sir. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, thank you. Mr. Joyce?
Given the opportunity for a second round, thank you very much, and Mr. Secretary.
It pays to come late.
Discretionary grants are becoming more and more difficult for smaller communities to apply for because the amount of work needed to complete a given application. From completing the benefit cost analysis to having to review 60 pages for notices of funding opportunities, small businesses are effectively being disqualified from receiving funds for vital community projects because of this burdensome process. Mr. Secretary, what is the department doing to make these programs more accessible to small and rural communities? And once these funds are awarded, what is the department doing to streamline the process so that they can be completed in a timely manner?
Thanks for the question. I approach this, as many other things, with the mentality of a mayor who once found myself knocking on the door of the USDOT, and a mayor of not the biggest city. I also think back to our time as a mayor when I found out that our paperwork for tax abatements was 17 pages and that we had a chance to get it down to 2 double-sized sheets, and I try to take the same approach in getting our federal paperwork under control. Believe it or not, when I began pressing our team to find ways to get our notices of funding opportunity under 100 pages, that was actually considered a reduction from past practice. Of course, part of what contributes to the complexity of it is just the nature and the number of statutory requirements that are built into each program, but it's certainly our intention to make sure that these are more user-friendly processes, especially so that smaller, rural, tribal, and lower income communities, which are some of the ones we most want and need to help, find it just as easy to navigate and succeed as the biggest cities that have a full-time staff of federal relations personnel here in D.C. Some of the measures we've taken to do that include not just trying to simplify or consolidate our application processes. For example, we took rural, mega, and infra programs and rolled them up into a single notice of funding opportunity, kind of the same way when you have an application for college, there's a common application so you don't have to fill in your zip code 7 different times. But also working hand in hand with those communities on the front end. And I'd like to take this opportunity just to, again, mention our belief in the Thriving Communities program, far from the biggest dollar item that we'll be asking this committee for, but one that's enabled us already to enlist dozens of communities in a program where we pair them up with capacity building partners with a view toward making them better able to compete and win. The last thing I'll mention is that it's not just the matter of applying for a grant and getting to yes, but then once you get the grant, there's the whole matter of actually getting through implementation. And the smaller or lower income a community, the more challenges they often face in even just getting from the award announcement to the grant agreement, a process that it's not unusual for just that part to take a year, and we're trying to fight that down to a tighter timeline. There, I think hands-on assistance helps, but we're also always interested in ways to simplify it, all the way down to just creating templates or finding ways to use online tools where there had been paper, pre-selected drop-down menus, anything that can just take some of the complexity out of it. And if you're hearing specific examples or pain points from communities you serve, we'd be interested in hearing that too, so that we can make these processes, again, more user-friendly.
Thank you. And you'll appreciate the fact that I sort of tailored my questions to your background, being a Great Lakes kid and a former mayor. And I also want you to know that if there's something that's in the statutory process that's creating these type of issues for you, this is a two-way street. You tell us where you think we can help simplify those, and we'll do the necessary work here to make sure that we make it easier for these communities to get those. Because I think you hit the point. The smaller communities are the one that need the grant the most, and they have the hardest time in doing that, or they're hiring somebody from the outside to be their grant person, and the money's not going to where it's needed, the people itself. So,
agreed.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Quiggs.
Thank you, Chair. I hope the public has enjoyed Mayor's Day here on the Hill. Ms. Secretary, thank you for being here. Appreciate your good work. And Mr. Chairman, great initial hearing, very important. We all know we have critical work to do in a pivotal year on all this. I think we have the right team in place. Very important hearing and well done. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike. Before we go, Mr. Secretary, one final question from me as we wrap up. Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Program is heading into an era where the size of the grants committed for transit projects are the largest in history. Inflation has had a big impact on it, but the amount of demand on the Capital Investment Grant Program pipeline looks astronomical over the next decade. Now, based on projects selected for FY25 in the annual report, FDA is slating over $20 billion in commitments via grant agreements, many of which are expecting hundreds of millions in payments each year from the THUD bill. IIJA provides $1.6 billion in advance appropriations, but the well runs dry in '26. So quickly, what is your response to the concern that this $20 billion projected level of commitment over the next decade might create a check that we can't cash?
In brief, we are working to make sure that we support as many worthy transit projects as we can with the funding that we have. As you note, there is a long list of projects that have met the statutory criteria to get a full funding grant agreement or to go into engineering. The 25 budget request $2.4 billion combined with that 1.6 that came through the infrastructure law that gets us to about $4 billion to meet those current and future needs. Just in terms of how that breaks out, that's about $1 billion for 4 existing new starts, $2.1 billion for 6 new starts projects not yet under construction grants, and then funding for new starts projects that might become ready for construction funding in '25, core capacity projects that might be ready in '25, and then $533 million for 4 projects that come under our small starts project. We do have enough currently to meet these commitments, but the impacts of budget cuts could force us to make payments over a longer period of time, which, as you note, can increase the time-related costs to projects. Not to go one more time into former mayor mode, but we all know that the longer a project takes, the more it costs if you've been in the business of delivering it. If FTA is to run up against the funding cap during the later years of an authorization, what that would mean is that FTA would have to delay signing any new full funding grant agreements until a new authorization was signed and provided additional funding authority. And it's fair to say that each passing year, those projects would become more expensive if we can't get to them yet because the funding hasn't been available.
Thank you. We are not going to require a second round. We've had a sampling of it here today. We're going to release the secretary to a cheeseburger or whatever he has on the menu.
Sounds pretty good, Chairman.
For lunch today. The rest of us are going to go vote. I want to thank publicly our team, Doug, your team, Avery, Kate, Jared, Naomi,
Christina, Charlie.
Oh, Demlin, how could I miss you? Christina, thank you. We don't want to overlook you, but we just appreciate the outstanding work of our team that has WOMAC-proofed this hearing today. So thank you so much. And Mr. Secretary, as always, we're just delighted to have you here, and thank you so much. For members that have follow-up questions that want to submit them for the record, you've got 7 days. Get them to subcommittee staff, and we'll make them a formal part of our record. In closing, again, thanks to all for coming this morning. Look forward to working with you as we continue down the path of the FY25 appropriations season. With that,